Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this IC Index webinar. We're just going to let a few more people into the room and then we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Well, less than a couple of minutes. Okay, there's quite a few people here now, so we'll get started. So thanks very much for joining us. This is the second IC Index webinar in four that we are going to be looking at this autumn. I've got a great panel here who I'll introduce in just a moment. It looks like everybody's on mute, which is great, so thanks very much. If you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll ask them either at the time, if they're sort of relevant to be asked at the time, or hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes at the end of the session and we can get through your questions here. But today we're talking about clarity of strategy. And just in case you're unfamiliar, these webinars that we're hosting at the moment are related to the IC Index, which is a bit of research that the IOIC has been doing for the past 3 years with Ipsos, Carrion and Box. And it looks at employees' perspectives, so employees nationwide, looking at their perspectives of internal communication, what they see as the challenges and the barriers to really understanding the messages that come through. So we will be looking at clarity of strategy here, and I've got Nikki Burslem, who is the founder and strategy director at the Culture Club, Debo Dyson, who is internal communications manager at Selfridges, and Caitlin Kerwin, who is senior internal communication and engagement specialist. So thanks very much, all of you, for joining. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the clarity of strategy in our organizations and maybe some of the barriers that employees face in really understanding where a company is going and how internal communications can work with their leaders and other members of the organization to really convey the messages in a clear way to make sure that employees understand the direction of travel, really. I think it's probably no surprise that the results show that employees are much clearer on strategy when it comes from the top. So 82% of employees feel clear on strategy when communications come from the CEO or the senior leader, compared with lower scores from other sources. And I think just to start off with, it'd be good to get your perspective on where we're going in terms of top-down communication versus other comms, because I think probably a few years ago we were trying to move away from top-down comms, and now it maybe feels a bit like we're moving back. Nikki, let me come to you first because you're sort of first in my list. Is that sort of a feeling that you've got when speaking to clients that maybe there is a sort of a move back to, or at least to elevating sort of senior leader comms more so than maybe we had 10 or 15 years ago?
Definitely. I think just on the phrase of top down, I think it's definitely become a bit of a dirty word or a dirty phrase where we try and avoid it almost like the plague. And I think when I think about top down, I think our association is kind of like imposing, whether it's change and actually it's not involving people, it's kind of pushing down decisions and excluding people. I think this is probably an exception to the rule where it's not like top down isn't just a good thing, but it's like unapologetically the best thing to communicate strategy. I think, CEOs have probably the most unique vantage point across an organization. They're the most accountable person for strategy. So I think in terms of a channel, they will be my go-to 100% or senior leaders or leaders of an organization to communicate strategy. But I just kind of think, and I think there is a move back for credibility and clarity and confidence on where you're going. That is 100% the role of a leader. And I think that's who we should be looking at. So I guess I would kind of think, actually, can we reframe the top-down bit of it? Because it's more like we were working with a client a couple of weeks ago and they were talking about there were 200 leaders at an event and they have to go and communicate strategy to 70,000 people. And, rather than saying this is a top-down cascade, we were saying it's more like a ripple effect. And actually, you've got this group of people at the center, and how do you make these waves of change and amplify the message and activate strategy and kind of bring people with you rather than kind of this push down. So I think, yes, leaders as a channel and definitely CEOs and senior leaders, but less of a thought of it being top down in the old sense of the word, and actually kind of celebrate the fact that they are influential, they're credible, and they are a really fantastic channel, if you want to put them that way, to use and really kind of lean into unapologetically, in my opinion, I think.
And Debo, are you getting a sense of that as someone who's internal, whether it's in Selfridges where you are at the moment or in your organizations, that perhaps, as I guess maybe internal communications has become less of, to use a term that people use, the post box to just post things on the internet, as maybe internal comms work has been less about writing stuff and delivering the message themselves. Have you found that you have started leaning on your leaders a little bit more to be the post box?
100%. Yeah. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Nikki's just said. COVID was obviously a huge kind of turning point for us in terms of how we as businesses and how our leaders communicate. Um, yeah, there's a fine balance, and I really agree with Nikki's point. I think when it comes to strategy, our CEOs and our senior leaders are the subject matter experts. They're the ones making the decisions, and I feel like it's right for them to own that message and bring the business, bring their teams on that journey. So it feels like it's the right format. It's yeah, to kind of build on Nikki's point a little bit more. It's top down's typically around being instructional, right? It's I've told you to do this one thing, and there's no two-way flows. I don't think leaders and CEOs communicating strategy is necessarily one way in the top down typically top down, but they feel to be the right people to own that message. So that's definitely the approach that we take, and where I've worked in my career so far, that the right people are owning the right message, and then as Nikki said, it kind of ripples or flows down, and hopefully back up to the business as well.
And Caitlin, why do you see that sort of leadership direction, the voice of the leaders? I suppose it's obvious, but I guess in your words, why is it so, I guess, uniquely effective versus other channels where, somebody could obviously reread the message in the same way, but is it just that sense of, feeling trust in your leaders that they're delivering the right message versus, an internal comms function? Why is it a bit more engaging, do you think?
Well, I think to flip it on its head, it's quite alarming when you have a CEO or a senior leader that doesn't want to be the one to deliver really important messaging about strategy, particularly if it's a new strategy or if it's a change of strategic direction or something like that. If they don't want to be the ones to announce that or talk about that, then that's concerning, not just for us as internal communicators, but for employees as well. And definitely, Robert, goes back to the trust piece, trust, credibility. Like Debo said, they're the ones that are really heavily involved in this strategic decision making. They're the ones on a daily basis talking about the kind of these really important decisions about the future of the business, and whether it's kind of a whatever level of strategy we're looking at, it's coming from them, it's coming from the top. And I don't think people want a kind of polishing of that message. They don't want it to go through levels of filtering and polishing and shaping for certain things and certain campaigns and certain messaging. That's absolutely the most appropriate way. But I think when it comes to strategy, people don't want that. Our employees want to be treated like adults, and they want to hear it kind of straight from the horse's mouth, which often is the CEO or the most senior department leader, depending on the structure of the organization, whatever that is. But yeah, to your point, I think it definitely comes back to trust. But yeah, I think it's kind of cutting out the middle ground and just hearing it straight away. But I do think it has to be a balance. Like, I know we're talking about the importance of that kind of top down piece, but I do think you need the balance, because you need that kind of the announcement, whatever it is, the initial communication of it, but then the bottom up piece has to kind of complement that. You need to talk about it with people and have those kind of discussions, and that more kind of informal style of conversation to, I guess, add the local context and yeah, kind of focus on the engagement piece. It's all well and good if we're just doing that announcement and just pushing that out because that's what people are saying they want about the strategy. But then you need to follow it up with that two-way piece, or it's kind of, I don't think you can have one without the other, really.
Yeah. I just wanted to come back on your piece about you talked about sort of having a polished message or a polished script. So I was going to talk to you about sort of the tone of voice that we have from our leaders, because there's a lot of talk, and it's come through in the IC Index, but other conversations that we're having in the profession about this need for leaders to build their human connections, to be more authentic. I guess perhaps to see things on the level of the people that they're talking to, but I guess in terms of clarity, it's really important in many ways that they stick to a script. I've often heard stories of chatting to other people where you have a strategy that's kind of agreed at the board, and then all the board leaders sort of interpret it in a slightly different way, and they might go away and tell their team something slightly different. So there is a sense, I think, that leaders need to have something that's slightly polished, but they need to be able to engage with people and to be able to talk quite informally. But I guess there are risks that they might go off script. I guess, Debo, thinking about that and the conversations that you have with your C-suite, how do you kind of coach them to make sure that they deliver the message in a clear way that has been agreed by everybody, that all the functions understand what it is, and that nobody nobody goes rogue?
Lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Um, if I just start with the authentic piece, because I
Yeah.
think that's super important. Um, Whenever we're working with leaders, we're always advising them to be consistent. The person that we see behind the camera, the person we see in a written update needs to be the same person that an employee would bump into at the proverbial water cooler. We shouldn't, as much as we want a polished version of them, we want them to look at their best self. We want them to be their best self, which is kind of in whatever guise that is. I know you're going to talk about the grapevine or the rumor mill like kind of later down the line, but just going back to the importance of kind of staying on the same page, I think it's for that really because in businesses, especially businesses as large as where I'm working currently at Selfridges, the rumor mill is a really powerful unofficial channel, should we call it?
Mm.
So making sure or supporting leaders, should I say, to be on the same page. Without heavily scripting them. It's super important just to make sure that messages are really clear and really consistent. So how can that look? That could be we've just given really simple, clear kind of key messages and takeaways, not pages and pages of paragraphs and copy, but just giving them kind of consistent, whether that's bullet points, whether that's taking time with them, just to have a quick conversation so that they're all on the same page, so that regardless of their functions, regardless of the spaces they kind of go into to communicate, they're speaking from the same almost script. It's a really, really careful balance. We don't want to over engineer it, but it's obviously super important to make sure that there's a really consistent message. And then going back to that tone piece, having them to kind of share or communicate in a way that feels really authentic to them. So just to repeat my earlier point, making them feel the same as they are in person as they are through, say, a virtual channel, whether that's video, whether that's written, whether that's an AMA, or so on and so forth.
I guess there's a sense, as you say, of giving them the bullet points, but making sure that you kind of give them permission to interpret it for their own teams to make sure that it's
Precisely.
relevant. Because if you have too strict a script, I guess they might be saying something that just doesn't resonate with people who might be frontline or might be elsewhere. So,
Right.
Nikki, I sort of see you nodding there. So, I guess as somebody who works with clients in terms of building culture and supporting leaders as well, what have you found in terms of how you support your clients to make sure that their leaders get that tone of voice right and deliver it in a way that is very much themselves, but aligns with the strategy that everybody's agreed?
Well, I was literally just on a call just before this one, having a debate around what is over engineering, how do we support people, but you can't, how do you possibly create this consistency without kind of creating 100 different narratives that are relevant to all? And I guess a lot of it depends on the size and scale of an organization. And we were talking to one region that's 70,000 people. So actually, when you get to that point, actually, we were talking about the consistency of the strategy being kind of why we're doing it in terms of kind of guiding principles of what we're doing, and then giving more permission to leaders to say, actually, then you need to go and translate what this means for your team and give them some guidance on how to translate that and some kind of tips on how to come across as like in a genuine, authentic way without over engineering and trying to kind of script everything. Because, like you say, I think strategy means so many different things to different people in different teams. It's really not possible, I think, as a communications team to kind of over engineer or try and support every nth degree of what that could mean. So I think, as Deborah was saying, really helping people with talking points for consistency. So my dog's about to bark, but also giving them enough guidance and support. And I think we came back to on the call I just had was you can really help leaders to prepare to own the message, but you can't prepare for them. So actually, how do you set them up with whether it's, a skill build around finding your style or like, how to preempt questions that people might have, how to actually share an uncomfortable message if that's what you're sharing. So really setting them up to do it, but making sure that I think this is where it's quite uncomfortable for comms teams, is making sure that leaders take ownership and that they have to go and do this themselves. And they have to, it's really clear if you've turned up 5 minutes before a town hall meeting and are reading a script versus if you've had some time to really take that on, add your own anecdotes, really translate this into what it means for you. I think that's where the authenticity comes from, is from a leader kind of owning it. And I think as a comms team or comms teams, we can support people with the tools, training and support and coaching, but actually kind of we can't own the message for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just to build that, I think Nikki, you've just made a really important point, because like we have to let go of control a little bit to a certain extent with that messaging. I don't want to let go of control. We have to let go of control. And I think if we're really uncomfortable letting go of control, it's perhaps because we don't trust the leaders to deliver that message in the way that we know is going to land. But I think that can still come back to us. You just said about coaching, training, communications training, that kind of stuff that we can do with our senior leadership teams to get them to a place where we do trust that they're going to deliver a message in a way that's going to resonate with people. Like we still have influence over that. I don't think it's one or the other. It's either we script everything and make them stick to the script, or we set them off into the wild and hope for the best. I think Nikki's point around coaching, training, support, that's where we need to lean into if we're not comfortable.
Yeah, one of the findings from the report was that employees respond best when leaders come to strategy and they tell it like it is, and it's kind of direct and it's honest. And I guess that does take some coaching. As Nikki mentioned, sometimes those are uncomfortable messages that you need to give, I guess, especially if the strategy is around a change strategy. Um, Caitlin, staying with you, what's your sort of advice to internal comms people on that coaching level to talk to talk to leaders about how they can deliver, I guess, honestly, directly, sometimes brutally honestly, but they still have to have a little element of empathy and of care in the way that they deliver certain messages. So how do we strike that balance?
I think it's about getting that clarity on the why. Like when it comes to this kind of messaging, the why is, in my opinion, more important than the what. I think it's a waste of time if we have the CEO or the senior leader talking in detail through the what. The what can follow up, the steps, the next step, the actions, the practical things. I think their role is to really lean into the why. Why is this happening? Why are we bringing in this new strategy? What is this change of direction? All of those really important things. And I think when they've got that real clarity on the why, I think everything else sort of clicks into place a little bit more,
Yeah.
providing the kind of talking points and rather than scripts that kind of Debo talked about. And yeah, I think coaching wise, it's getting your leadership team to a point where they're able to articulate that why. If they're confident and able to articulate it and they have, all the context, they can explain where this strategy is coming from. They can explain what that means in practice. And then when it kind of gets into the nuts and bolts, the step by step, all of that stuff, exactly like everybody else has mentioned, that's when it kind of goes down to the more local communications and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Of course, there's value as well in coaching on how to communicate and all of these different things and kind of giving CEOs and senior leaders more confidence in the way they physically deliver messaging. But I think when we're talking about strategy, the most important thing is to work with them and spend the time getting them to a point where the articulation of the why behind the strategy comes really naturally.
Mm. The research showed in terms of how many people feel that they are actually clear on the strategy. So the IC index, about two-thirds of employees who were polled said that they're clear, or they have a clear message for the employees as to strategy and business direction. So that's quite a huge amount of people. Like a third of employees don't feel that their employer is being clear on it. So Debo, I'll come to you first, and obviously to talk in any experience that you have, not necessarily at Selfridges, but what do you think might be the barriers for being clearer? Is it a case that, as Caitlin says, maybe we're not getting the why across, or maybe we're over communicating or under communicating, or leaders are a little bit hesitant? What do you think might be some of the reasons that we could improve on and we could build to make sure we bridge that gap?
I really agree with Caitlin. I think it's the why. It's really strong. It's a huge piece of work. There isn't a one why fits all almost. I don't know if I've coined a term there.
That's good. I like it.
Thank you.
That's going on the wall.
Yeah.
But it's the why, right? It's translating the strategy into people's everyday realities. The CEO, the executive team, the SRT are in a really unique position to be able to do that, but they might not be kind of within that day to day and of kind of everyone's realities. And I think that's where people managers, where those kind of local communications can become super important, where we need to really rely on those people managers, those middle managers to really translate, be that kind of middle ground between the strategy and people's day to day. So yeah, I think it's that. I think that you said, what do you say, two-thirds of people don't understand strategy. I think it's because they're not understanding the role that they play in that. There's obviously that really famous NASA quote about the janitor saying, "What do you do here?" And he says, "I'm sending a man to the moon," because he understands his why, what he's doing. So I think if we're able to do that for our people and able to kind of get those messages down to translate to everyone's realities, then we'll be able to do our job. Now, it's a huge job. It's not just on IC. I think it relies on the business really being bought in, sorry. It takes a lot of time. It's not going to be one CEO doing one video message or one written update and everybody understanding it. There's a layer of management and leadership who need to understand the why for their functions and their departments, and it kind of needs to go down in that way. But yeah, I am strongly on favor of the why.
Do you think the how is important as well? I'm just thinking maybe it's the same thing, but if we're talking about, not only why we're going in this direction, but you both sort of touched upon the fact that, well, all of you, the fact that every role and every individual has in contributing to the strategy. And I guess, even more, that's even more granular because, everybody's how is different. But I guess at some point we need to get that strategy down to the line managers to make sure that they then feed in the how to their teams. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, and that's where, that one size fits all, that one why fits all doesn't always work, right? It's about businesses being cognizant of what they're trying to achieve and how long it'll take for them to achieve it. That can't be done in one all hands for 70,000 people.
Yeah.
It does mean that we have to take a bit more time to make sure that the right people are engaged, that they understand the impact on them, the expectations of them as communicators to take it down to their teams.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Nikki, I interrupted you.
No,
I'm sure you
I was just thinking around with the how part of it, and I was kind of when I was reading the stat, I was like, I bet it's actually a lot lower than that. If you, depending on how you ask the question, because I think if you say like ask, is the strategy clear, yes or no, you might say yes, but actually it might be a no. If you ask like, okay, what's your role in delivering the strategy? For me, the sign of if it's clear, someone can explain what their role is in delivering where you're going as an organization. From my experience, whenever I ask somebody that question, it's usually like people can't articulate it very well. So I think actually the level of real strategy understanding in organizations is very low. And I think it's for all the reasons that we've just been talking about, where we kind of talk about it. There's a strategy deck that is shared at a town hall meeting and it all looks super clear on the surface. You're like, I get that. I get where we're going. I get our goals. I get it. Then you think about, okay, well, what does that mean for what I go and do tomorrow? How do I spend my time? Do I need to do anything differently? Or like, what do I need to stop doing? Then there's a massive gap between what people kind of have heard in the town hall meeting and how that translates into their job, which makes me think then actually, you know, is that, how far has that strategy really got? How much has it been activated? So I feel like there's a huge gap. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is helping to translate strategy into action because even at a leadership level, we've been working on a couple of strategic narratives, and we talk about a term. Let's say we want to be like a leading kind of technology company. That sounds so clear as a vision. Then you start to ask, like, well, what's the leading technology company? And everyone's got a different answer. So if you think about how, if that's not clear at the top, just it's gonna the muddiness of that's just going to multiply as you go through and through and through. So I think, yeah, I was quite surprised that it was that high in the start personally. And I think that actually if you ask a different question, you get a lower kind of number. And I think, yeah, finding that bridging the gap, I think is working with, like Deborah said, with people managers to help translate what that strategy means and really bringing them in to say, right, because it's not possible for comms teams to do this for people. You need to understand, from a almost like a layer down. Senior leaders translate, then you translate for your people, then you align your objectives and everything like that. But I think it's yeah, much more than a message. It's really important, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges we're seeing with all the clients that we're working with at the moment, for sure.
I guess it's almost just going to your point there. It's almost a bit like making sure that you're distinct between what the vision is and what the strategy is. Because to me, the vision is almost like we want to be the biggest technology company in the world. And some people may be confused and think that is also the strategy, but the strategy is more the practical steps that you need to take to get there. So it's the why and the how combined, really. I think you probably will answer this question, but I was just going to say that of the other third, it was actually two-thirds that said that they were clear. But of the other third, 21% were sort of neutral, and the other 12% were negative about the clarity of the strategy. So I was going to ask, how we can sort of shift that 21% into the positives, because then you've got like almost 9 out of 10 people are clear. And I guess it is just, if anybody's got any different thoughts, but I guess it is just reinforcing that why and how, not just saying what we want to do, but it's just making sure that you're clear on the steps, the why, the how, what it actually means. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think, it's repeating. It's not just like a launch of a strategy in one thing. It's a constant, a strategy is like what you do as an organization. It's not like a message to communicate. It's fundamentally what's going to deliver success as an organization or not. So I
Yeah.
think it has to be much more than a conversation, and it has to be, every performance conversation, every objective setting exercise, every day when you choose to spend your time on something or not, that is what you're delivering your strategy. So I think there's so many opportunities to be cognizant of it, and it's not just like a kind of cascade situation would be my
Mm.
just making it unavoidable, and you can't miss it because it's there all the time.
I think that's something really practical that we as internal communicators can do on a daily basis. I think we're often very good at the launch bit, the announcement, whatever it is. We're good at that bit. We do the big all hands. We have the follow-up comms. We have the focus groups. We're really good at that. But perhaps it's that integration piece and it's that embedding piece, exactly like you said, Nikki. It needs to weave into everything. And what we're doing practically in the internal comms world, if we've got regular newsletters going out, if we've got, all these different updates, whatever our regular comms cadence is, whatever it's looking like, the strategy can't be looked at in isolation. It's something that I see time and time again. And back in my in-house days, and also with a lot of the organizations that I support now, strategy is a thing that's put in a box over there, but it can't be that. If we really want it to be embedded and it to be understood, and we want to get those numbers up into the positives, it's got to be woven into everything. We've got to be kind of restructuring the way we communicate and looking at the different pillars in our strategy, and we've got to kind of weave it into our day-to-day messaging and make it really make sense. It's a similar conversation to the one we have around values. If we're trying to embed new values into an organization, it can't be a launch and then put away in a box over there to be picked up again, I don't know, at the next CEO town hall in February 2027. It's got to be something that is spoken about regularly and interwoven, I suppose, rather than looked at as a separate thing.
There was another stat in the report as well about, and this may kind of come back to your point there, Caitlin, about 6 out of 10 employees. Only 6 out of 10 employees believe that the organizational strategy is actually the right one. So I'm interpreting from that even if they understand it, they're not necessarily convinced that that they agree with it. And I wondered, Caitlin, I'll stay with you, if what your feeling might be about that. And I suppose part of that is reinforcing the why, because everybody needs to understand why you're doing it. But do you think there's something else in there that sort of ties in again with your point about vision and values, making sure that people understand that that the organization is clear enough on the strategy and making sure that it aligns with the values and that it does connect the dots to other things that have been said before? But can you think of other reasons why 4 out of 10 employees might feel that the strategy is not the right one? And what can we do about that from a communication point of view?
It's a really interesting one. And actually, when I first read the report, that was higher than I expected, because it's kind of the way the stats have come through is, it's like, yes, they do understand what it is. They know it, they see it, they understand it, they hear it, but they still don't believe it's the right strategy, that it's the right direction for the organization. So yeah, I found that really interesting. I think, without wanting to sound like a broken record, I think it does still always come back to that why. If people are hearing what the strategy is, they're seeing, I don't know, what the organization is aiming for, what we're kind of working towards, how that fits with everything that's going on day to day, yet they don't believe that's the right strategy. I think we haven't done a good enough job of setting the context, because no strategy is created in isolation, and it shouldn't be communicated in isolation. But if it's landed in that way and people think, that doesn't fit right, that doesn't feel right for me, I don't think that's the right strategy for the organization I'm part of, then yeah, I think it's the context, it's that wider reasoning. I think it can also flag alarm bells around two-way communication. If people are sitting there receiving that messaging and thinking that's not right, I don't believe in that, I don't have faith in that, does that mean you haven't got enough opportunities for two-way communication, for those employees to feed back, for those employees to feel like they're part of it? Are they regularly being asked their opinion? Do they have channels where they can share where they are and what they're thinking? And if the strategy lands and it's a complete shock and a complete surprise to them, that to me says that they haven't kind of had that ongoing opportunity to contribute and to feedback and to feel part of what the company's doing. It's a really interesting one, and yeah, it's a concerning stat, definitely.
Yeah, Debo, what do you think? Have you got any other thoughts on sort of why employees may not believe in the strategy?
Unfortunately, not. I really agree. I really agree
Yeah,
with Caitlin on this. I think it
yeah,
really does go back to that why and bringing it into the realities, as Caitlin said, and I really agree. Building strategy is not people in a room just making the decision. There's lots of research, there's lots of insights and rationale. And at that kind of, I guess, launch phase, what's the journey that you've brought your employees on to understand why this is the right strategy? Um,
Mm.
you're almost selling it at that launch phase, right?
Mm.
You're bringing in the external context, you're bringing in the performance of the last year, the last 5 years to explain why this is the right method. And then just harping back to what we were speaking about earlier, making it make sense for them,
Yeah.
their place in that. So yeah, I strongly believe still in that why. How you can do that, it's consistency, right? It's, you might have your quarterly strategy updates, you might have your biannual all hands, but it's also, your reward and recognition initiatives. Are they laddering up and linking into it? In terms of the IC teams, the stories that we're telling about the business, not only are we celebrating the wins, but are we celebrating the people behind those wins and letting people see their role and their impact in kind of delivering the strategy? I think that's a role that we can definitely play in that. Storytelling is a huge opportunity for us.
I just wanted to touch on the concept of managers, which I think we highlighted earlier, the important role that they have in terms of this cascade idea. And from the research, and there were some managers who were obviously interviewed as part of this. So we're talking about line managers, really, not senior leaders. So only 30% of them saw that making strategy easy to understand was one of their top responsibilities, which I guess you've kind of I understand that they obviously have other things day to day, but that's quite an important thing, and it's quite a challenge. I know it's the ongoing challenge that we have in internal communication to make sure that line managers play and see the importance of their role in communicating with their teams. But what can we do as internal communicators to, I guess, aside from being clearer in the actual message we give to them, but I guess being clearer in making sure that they understand the importance of their role. So, Deborah, do you have any experience, again, in Selfridges as to how you communicate with line managers to make them realize the importance of the job that they have to convey that message and sort of be the next, the sort of the bridge between leaders and employees with the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, our managers at Selfridges are super important, right? We've got 70% of our population are on the ground, selling, interacting with our customers, creating extraordinary experiences every day. And our people managers are absolutely pivotal. I think a really important piece, there's twofold. One is meeting them where they are. So understanding their day to day, kind of checking into the realities. They're super busy. I mean, which manager isn't, but they're super busy understanding what their days look like and meeting them where they are. So they've got regular check-ins with their leadership teams and their own teams that they manage. So coming along to those and making sure that we're nicely plugged in. And another one is respecting their role. I coin it as, so that's about timing. That's about the degree of information that we share. So understanding that we need to give them information a week, 2 weeks in advance to make sure that they've got time, one, to digest it, and then two, to translate that to their team. And equally matching the kind of formats that they prefer to communicate in. So at Selfridges, we're very much, an in-person conversational business. So when we've got kind of big, important news to share or communication to update, I'll meet them where they are and I'll go and have a conversation with them. And then I'll have like drop in sessions. So if anyone does want to have a conversation or kind of explore in a bit more depth, they've got that time with me. So rather than just a kind of a blanket written update or linking them to a digital channel, kind of flexing our approach to match kind of what works for them. So yeah, those two things that have worked quite well for me. Not perfect, but definitely seeing an improvement for sure.
And Nikki, I'm sure with some of your clients as well, you've worked with them obviously to support them in their line manager communication as well.
Mm.
So I guess, how can we kind of support those line managers to build their communication skills, but also their belief in the strategy? Is it almost a case that, and I'm sure I've heard this with lots of other companies in the past as well, that they've almost tested the strategy with line managers first or given them a couple of days notice to come back with any questions to make sure that they fully understand it? I guess it's quite important to maybe not necessarily tell line managers at the same time as everybody else, or is there another way that
Exactly.
you've done it?
But I do think that happens too much. And I think I've got kind of lots of different opinions on this question. But I think we see so much investment into senior leaders and just not with people managers. And I just think it's so outweighted. And actually, people managers probably manage the most amount of people in the organization. They're the biggest variance of internal engagement or not. I don't see enough investment or prioritization on actually what their role is. So I guess yeah, on a really practical level, a lot of people are promoted into people manager roles. And I always wonder, like, have you ever explained what that role really is and how it's different from the one you did before? And it's not just like you now manage people doing the same job. But I wonder if you made it like a new day one and re-onboarded someone and said, this is the role of a manager, like how clear is it to them that what their role is? And it is to activate strategy and it is to kind of do all of this stuff. I don't think it's clear enough in any organization that I see that that is a really fundamental part of their role. So I think number one is actually just make sure people know that that's part of their role. Then it's all of the investment in actually, rather than, I totally agree that people should be brought in sooner and actually say kind of like testing a strategy, helping build it, they're closest to where work gets done so they can really start to shape it. So there's one in kind of the building the strategy and two, and then in terms of kind of activating it, I guess that's the difference for me is it's not just a case of cascading it with their team. It's genuinely there to kind of make it happen. So I think it's a bigger role than a messenger. It's more of an activator or kind of going into execution. And actually, think about the way that we do that with senior leaders. We don't do the same thing with people managers, and I just don't really understand why. There's no, other than, yes, there are more people managers than senior leaders, so maybe it's more expensive, but I just see senior leaders get so much investment in how they go and communicate, and people managers are just kind of left to deal with it and probably have the hardest job of everyone. Because they're kind of on the receiving end of stuff and they have to go bring their teams through everything. They don't get the coaching, they don't get the support, they don't get the clarity. It's kind of like the day before they say, by the way, this is happening. So I think acknowledging the importance, giving them the support, maybe moving some of the investment out to senior leaders, because it's so disproportionate in my mind. It needs to be kind of level played a little bit, I think.
Caitlin, you were nodding there. Is that something that you've sort of seen and encouraged in the clients that you've worked with, this need to maybe invest a bit more in line managers? Is there anything else that you would recommend to follow up on Nikki's points that, internal communicators here on the call could go away and just rethink the way that they sort of target line managers as a communication source and a communication channel for the teams below them?
Yeah, I think the most important thing there is we need to stop throwing our line managers to the wolves. We need to stop surprising them with an email with a really important thing to communicate, either at the same time as their teams receive it or like an hour before. And they're like, well, I don't understand what this means. So how am I now supposed to articulate that and translate it to my team members? So we just need to get better at that. And it's hard because their priorities are not our priorities when it comes to communications, what messaging we want to get across. And that goes back to Debo's point around meeting them where they're at. It's really important to understand that and be respectful of time. But a much more kind of practical thing. So literally just this morning, I've concluded a project for one of my clients around exactly like Nikki said, that onboarding piece around new people leaders. So often people leaders are just, or people are promoted into a people leadership role within an organization. They've already been with the company years, they've already done, all their onboarding, they're part of the organization, they're promoted into this people leadership role, and suddenly they have a team, or maybe even just one or two direct reports. At what point do the majority of organizations explain what that actually entails? At what point do we say, okay, welcome to the people management community. Here's what it means to be a people leader with X company. Here's what's expected. Even to the really basic level things that we as internal communicators think are obvious. One-to-ones, team meetings, team huddles, talking about strategy, articulating things, translating things. Those kind of things aren't obvious to everybody. And that's not at all a dig, because operational team leaders, boots on the ground, they're doing the job and it's not their priority. So it's on us to really articulate that and explain that. So the packs that we worked on are really basic packs that are circulated as PDFs, and it really sets out like, this is how we do things around here as a people leader. This is what's expected of you as a people manager in this company. Here's where you can get more resource, more information, and here's what we're going to give to you. Here's how we're going to support you. Here's the briefing docs that you're going to receive on like a weekly basis or whatever that is. Here's a hub within our intranet where you can go to get resources. So I think that's a really practical thing, and it's not a huge lift for us when you think about the outcome of that. The outcome is you're creating a community of allies who are able to communicate and who are able to kind of confidently talk to their teams about things like strategy. And that's really important because, yeah, we all too often go, oh, our people managers are terrible at communicating. They're not sharing this message. They're not sharing that message. But are we putting our arms around them? Are we giving them the support that they need? And it doesn't matter if you've got a community of 200 people managers or 2,000 people managers. It's about giving that support, putting the stuff, the resources, the documents in a central place where they can be accessed, and kind of being there and giving them the right lead in times, not throwing them to the wolves, like I said at the start.
Yeah. Deborah, I wanted to come back to your point from earlier about the rumor mill. One of the things I was quite surprised about was that that is actually still a source of strategy information for some employees, which is kind of worrying, really. I mean, I can appreciate obviously that they will get some of their information from the rumor mill, but we do talk a lot in internal comms about shadow comms, about the use of other unofficial channels to get this information across. But 7% of the employees who responded said that that was one of their sources of strategy. But actually, those who did respond, there was the clarity of it dropped by 50%, which I suppose is obvious because a rumor mill won't have all the answers. But what's your advice or your suggestions for trying to have the official channels that we value for strategy cutting through that speculation? How can we quash rumors? How can we stop them if you can stop them altogether? What's your advice
Or
around
start them.
that? Or
Or
start, yes, or
start
start a
them.
positive
Oh
rumor,
my
yeah.
God, Nikki. Or start them. I love that. You're right. It's speedy, it's potent, it's ever present, the rumor
Yeah.
mill. But yeah, as you say, it has a tendency to, I don't know, twist and distort information a little bit. So yeah, 5 people down the chain have heard something slightly different to, I guess, what was intended. I don't know if it could ever be quelled, truly. But things we could try and do, I think linking to Caitlin's earlier point is about timing, you know, respecting our people managers, giving them time beforehand. I think the rumor mill is really powerful when that one message is sent to everybody at the same time. And then they go to their manager and go, what does that mean? And the manager goes, I don't know. I just got at the same time as you. And so they start to speculate together. I think the rumor mill is an offshoot of speculation. So what they need is clarity, right? So if we're giving our people managers the opportunity to digest information, ask the stupid questions, be really clear on what a change means or a piece of communication means for them first, and then for their teams. Hopefully, they're then equipped to quell what the rumor could be. I guess when we talk about strategy from a broader perspective, something that worked really well for me. It's a bit risky, and not every, especially like HR team, would be comfortable with this. But like AMAs, I found to be really so AMAs. Ask Me Anything. In my last business, we shifted. I joined a company just before COVID, and we have to shift our ways of working pretty rapidly, and still maintain connection across a global business in 30 countries. And we found AMAs to be a really great way to kind of connect our C-suite and our senior leadership team with the rest of the business. We would time them with things that are happening in the business. So, for instance, during our financial results, our CFO would jump on to Yammer at the time, now called Viva Engage, and do an AMA. And that was an opportunity for employees to ask kind of those burning questions. Obviously, mixed results with that. But giving people the opportunity to ask those questions straight to the source, I think was really good.
Deborah,
But I definitely
can I
go on.
ask, did you ask for questions in advance and then the leader had a bit of insight before they answered, or were they spontaneous on the spot?
It was a blend because bless them, it was a bit of a risky move. So it was a bit of a blend. So yeah, we did have some questions in advance,
Okay.
but it was also an open session. So it was all digital. It was all kind of written in the
Hmm.
thread. So we would have some questions not planted, but asked in advance, and we would
Hmm.
have that kind of interspersed with live questions. So we would be there on a call with the CFO, and we'd be like, right, well, this person's asked a question, this person's asked a question. So some
Hmm.
they would be prepared for, and some they wouldn't. In that hour's time, they would get a chance to answer as many as they could, but then they had the list of those outstanding questions that they would kind of come back to. We would then like copy those, put them in an article on the intranet. And I think it worked really well. And it was a great way, just going back to your earlier point around authenticity as well, for the leader to really just come through. There were spelling errors, there was grammar and punctuation errors, but it
Hmm.
showed that it was happening in real time and that it was an actual live conversation. But not to focus on that one too much, I think timing is really the key in terms of the
Hmm.
room. I think it's respecting our leaders, respecting our people managers. If we give them enough time that they can hopefully answer those questions that their team might have kind of immediately, rather than people going, I asked my manager a question, they didn't have the answer. What have you heard?
Hmm.
I'm kind of in those backspaces.
I
And I
think
suppose,
sorry,
go on, go on.
I
No,
was
you
going to
go.
say, I was kind of joking about feeding the rumor mill. But in some ways, I'm not, because I think a lot of the times you can see rumors start because they're filling a void or whatever. But I also think you can learn a lot from where who do people go to
Mm.
as their source of information. And I think without kind of overly formalizing it, they're essentially like a group of influencers, right? But you can almost ask managers in their teams, like, who is it that someone will go to ask, like, what's really going on? You will spot the same people. They are your rumor mill. And I think actually, someone told me once, you can't stop the grapevine, but you can give it good fruit. And I just think actually, what if you used those people to feed them like the story, the message,
Mm,
whatever. And
mm.
actually, they are, I don't want to badge it like an influencer network because then it becomes a bit corporate and then it becomes, you kind of lose the magic that it has already. But I just think there's a way of learning from where the rumors come from, even listening to what the things are, and just, it's a source of feedback essentially. And if they're saying it, other
Mm.
people are probably thinking it. So I, I think whilst part of me thinks, right, don't try and feed the rumor mill, part of me thinks actually what can you learn from it and how can you use it to your advantage? So I think you need to be a bit unconventional about it.
Yeah,
They
definitely.
are internal influencers, though, aren't they?
They
Like, it's
are, but I
I
think as soon
can't
as you
stop
start
banging
to
on
think,
about them.
yeah, but as soon as you start to then create like an influencer network, then it becomes like, oh, that's the influencers. I think just keep it real. And
Informal,
yeah,
yeah. But then putting your arms around that group, exactly like you said,
exactly.
finding who they
Stealth,
are,
stealth mode.
inviting them into focus groups,
Yeah,
inviting them into kind of pre-launch previews
mm,
and things like that, without perhaps them knowing that you're
exactly.
intentionally targeting them. There's
Yeah,
huge value in that, isn't there?
But yeah, you definitely need to be a part of it to be able to understand what the sort of mistakes are in the rumors, what rumors are true, what rumors you can kind of crystallize and make slightly clearer. So it's definitely good to try and be, weave your way into those groups somehow, because as we've said, you can't necessarily stop rumors, but you can actually address them if you know what the problematic rumor is.
yeah,
So it's definitely good to have your eye on it, and I think, as you say, yeah, probably lots of the people who are involved in that rumor circle like the fact that it's all a bit clandestine, and that
yeah,
you elevate
exactly.
them to be
And they like
influencers.
to
They're
have a
like, oh, I don't want to do
moan.
that.
And they like to have a moan. And I just
Yeah,
think lean
yeah,
into it, just like enjoy
yeah,
it, just find who your people are and just have a go and have a moan with them and find out. It's all feedback essentially. So I think
yeah.
it's all useful.
Yeah. We talked a little about some of the other more official channels like intranets and emails. We've obviously talked about the value right at the top that leaders have in communicating it, but the clarity from other internal comms, as I say, such as emails or internet, is a bit low. It's 70%. So what can we kind of do to improve that? Because obviously that's part of internal communicators' day-to-day role. Obviously you've got the leaders that you're coaching, but in terms of the messages that we're going at, how can we kind of lift it above 70%? So I guess, Deborah, coming back to you as internal in-house person at the moment, how can we kind of elevate the traditional internal comms channels to be a bit clearer on strategy, to kind of get them up to the level where the leaders have?
Yeah, I think first of all, like face to face, in person is the most powerful, the most potent channel that can't be beaten. I think our traditional channels, our digital IC channels are great, always super useful, but I think nothing beats a conversation between people. A business is just a bunch of humans that have agreed to work together, right? So
Mhm.
those human face to face conversations, I think, are super important and should always trump. I guess maybe I'm a little bit biased because I work in such a fast-paced, people-centric, in-person business. But that's definitely, what's working the best here. I think there's also a balance here between, certainty and clarity, right? Let's take strategy for an example, or change for example. Um, for the facts, for the facts, things like the intranet, things like our digital channels are super useful in terms of here's what's happening, when and how. But for that, what's in it for me? What does it mean for me? Why should I care? That's where I think a conversation between an individual and their manager, or a team and their manager or leader, is super different because they can really tailor that to what it means for them as individuals. So um, I think our channels, yeah, can be super important, are super important, of course, but nothing really beats that in-person clarity when it comes to strategy, when it comes to what does that really mean for our employees kind of in their day-to-day on the ground.
And Caitlin, sort of building on that in terms of all the devices and tools that we have to communicate strategy, do you think there's a possibility of having strategy fatigue, and that we communicate about it so much that it sort of becomes a bit noise and goes in one ear and out the other? So how do internal communicators maintain a drumbeat to make sure that it is clear and that people understand it and that the message is kind of healthily reinforced, but without sounding like you're, beating people over the head with the same message? How do you how do you get that balance?
I think you're right. I think it's almost inevitable if you're constantly talking about strategy to kind of feel that fatigue and people just will start switching off. But I think that's where it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, that you can't only talk about strategy in isolation as a thing in a box over there. Strategy, this is strategy. It's got to be everything. It's got to be interwoven. It's got to be the messaging you're putting out, your normal day-to-day stuff, the recognition stuff, the things that are happening, the updates, the kind of the drumbeat of the business, like you said. But that's got to feed through and be consistent with strategy. So in your kind of regular updates and your messaging and your content, it's weaving it into that and saying how that links back to that. Oh no, well, in line with our objectives to blah 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 blah. Like it's making it part of what you're saying without it having to be a separate standalone thing, because otherwise it just becomes another thing to communicate. Or what about if we reframe it and think, well, the strategy is the lens through which we talk about almost everything, and it brings context to everything else we're doing and we're communicating. And we don't want to just be talking about whatever the strategy is. I've had some bizarre names of strategies and people hear the name and they go, oh, stop, I don't want to hear anything more about that. But if it's woven in and it's part of what you're saying and it's linked together, then it just becomes the day to day. Like your strategy should be really your business as usual, because otherwise, how are you going to achieve it and how are you going to win in that sense? So, obviously, there's certain things that will always sit outside of that. But I genuinely do think the majority of what we're communicating, what we're doing, the events we're running, everything we're doing with people should, in some way, shape, or form, link back to the strategy without directly saying strategy, and giving people a headache.
Exactly. And I don't think it has to be like dry. I think actually, if you look at kind of the role of leaders is to get the clarity and confidence and the belief and the buy-in. Actually, use your other channels to celebrate progress and share stories of it in action and kind of all of that kind of stuff. But I think you can have a bit of fun with it as well. And I think quite often, it's not about kind of writing more about the strategy or the pillars or the explanations. It's more showing progress and celebrating. We've had a win here. We've like, you could have a failure party and be like, actually, this is what didn't work. This is what we've learned from it. There's just more creative ways, I think, to use other channels that isn't rewrites of what's already been said, which I think we see a lot of.
And almost subtly, as you say, if you show it in action and you get other people telling the story as well, it's if you do it in the right way, it's almost as if people reading it don't realize that
They
they're
don't even
reading about
know.
the strategy.
Exactly.
It's
Like,
they're sort of
ban the word.
absorbing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we often ban the word culture when we talk about clients because it's just unhelpful in some ways. You don't need to use the word strategy at all. It's just kind of what you do and everything you're doing is related to that as
It's the
well.
way we're doing things, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's the why we're doing it and the way we're doing it. And yeah, it doesn't have to be separately called out all the time.
Yeah. We're not too far from the end. I've got a couple of other things I just wanted to talk about, and I wanted to go back to the point about listening. We talked a little bit about two-way feedback, and we talked a little bit about the rumor mill as well. So the IC Index reports that 53% of their 53% of employees think their organization is good at showing how feedback is acted upon, and a quarter disagree. So there's this idea of closing the loop as well and making sure that leaders and internal comms understand how people feel about the strategy, which obviously it sounds like not enough are doing that. So I guess, Devo, coming to you, what do you think is a really effective listening strategy within, I guess, within Selfridges at the moment or within any other organization that you've worked for in terms of making sure that you get the clarity in the other directions so that you kind of understand whether people are not understand it and whether you need to adapt it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously listening's super important, right? That's where we understand what's really going on in people's day to day, and how they relate to it. It's a balance, right? Do you want people to be able to recite the strategy on a page, or do you want them to be able to kind of articulate their role in a way that makes sense to the strategy? I think being really consistent, I don't like to use this term, but and it's had many guises everywhere I've worked, but that whole you said we did piece, right? About linking what people have, the actions that people have commented to what we've done for them or sometimes to them. But having that consistent loop, managing people's expectations, making sure that it's super important, right? Once we've taken time out to listen to people, just like we spoke about before when we launch a strategy and then we kind of go off and it sits in the ether. Similarly, when we listen to our people, that we are planning what that playback looks like, so that they can actually see that their words and their sentiment are really important. Because if we don't do that, they're going to lose favor. And then we try and repeat this exercise in 6 months, in a year, they're going to shrug their shoulders and go, "What's the point? Because I did this a year ago and you guys did nothing." So making sure, so something that IC can do is work with our leadership teams to make sure that not just those listening sessions, those post opinion survey or post pulse survey lessons are in the diary, but also what that playback looks like. So it's really consistent, and our employees kind of know when they can expect to hear back from us, what their actions are. We can't do everything. It's a really careful balance. People are going to come up with, pay me more, or I want this benefit, or add better gym membership, or whatever, add more days, paid days off, whatever. We can't do everything. But you've got to lean into the uncomfortable sometimes, and kind of set the scene, but where you can make a positive change, you definitely need to play back that to teams sooner rather than later, or you're at risk of losing favor. And hi to Nikki's dog.
Yeah, I think it's a good point around you can't do everything that you hear. And whenever kind of we're working with a client that, listening is always great. But I think it's like being quite filtered about what you're willing to act on from the first, when you go out to listen to something, whether it's kind of one of my points I didn't say earlier around belief in strategy. I think there's a lot of people believe in what they've had a part in shaping. So I think actually if you start to go out and listen to before you kind of build your strategy, you start to look at actually what are the things that are working, where are the friction points, where can we do this and that. I think framing what you're listening to and what you're willing to act on is really important. I think if it's a really open, wide net of like, let's just say anything, there's going to be so many things that you can't act on. And that's where I think the loop falls down, because, or there's just so many things that you can't possibly do. Whereas I think if you're really targeted with what you want to listen to or what you want the input on, then it really helps you to say, actually, you know what, we're going through a strategy cycle. What we really need to know about is A, B, and C. Then you can start using that to kind of act on what you're actually going to feed into. If you open it too wide, I feel like you're just setting yourself up for failure, really, and for people not to really believe in it, people just be a bit pissed off because they've said something that hasn't been acted on. Then people are very resistant to go back and say, here's all the things that we've heard that we're not acted on, because it feels really uncomfortable. So I think there's a lot of things where it's like, listen, but listen carefully, with some guidelines, I'd say.
Yep. We're coming to the end, so I'll just ask one final question, which I suppose is just a wrap up, or giving me your one top tip that we've discussed. So if we were to sort of make a recommendation for internal communicators to kind of plan a little bit differently as to how we can make sure that strategic communication feels, I guess, equally relevant and clear to frontline employees, the majority of employees, what should we focus on first? So Caitlin, coming to you, sort of all the things we've discussed, or even anything we haven't mentioned, what's sort of one thing that you would hope people here go away with and do differently?
I think it's to not put strategy in a box. Don't put it in a box and put it on the shelf and leave it over there. It's the butter. Weave it through everything. Talk about it regularly. Don't just launch something or introduce a strategy and then think, oh, we should probably do a strategy update as part of that, or we should probably do a strategy. Don't like that as well, but don't just rely on that. Weave it through, shape your messaging and your internal communications approach overall, and align your IC strategy with your company strategy. Like, yeah, for me, it's that interwovenness and that integration.
I feel like we've got some great phrases here about strategy being the butter. There's no one fits all. Start your own rumor mill. I think there's three different things.
We'll have a little dictionary.
Yeah. Debo, what do you think? What would be your one takeaway, or your one bit of advice for people to take away?
I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna give two. I'm sorry. I can't.
Two is fine. Two
I
is
can't
fine.
choose between them. First is divest in your people managers. When you ask about the frontline team, it's really about that piece, right? We've spoken about it today. When strategy comes out, giving your people managers a chance to digest it, understand what it is, make sure they're really clear on the expectations, as their role as translators, and where needed, support them, whether that's kind of one-to-one conversations, small group conversations, templates, tools, resources, the breadth that I see really excel in. So yeah, invest in your people managers. And then my second one would be tell the story of your strategy. So, it's not about necessarily breaking down the 3 or 4 pillars and using that language in every piece of communication, but it's telling the story of your people. They're celebrating their successes and their wins that link to the strategy. So those would be my two.
Great. And Nikki?
I'm going to try and do it all encompassing. So I think all of these things take investment, and I don't think without investment we can do any of the stuff that we've talked about today. So I would say get your senior leader team, exec team on board with almost per head, what is this worth? And say, strategy isn't just like a message, right? It's like the fundamental success of your organization. And we say, like, how much are you willing pounds per person to put into them really getting it and executing it? Use that as your budget then to assign. Because I think without the backing, and it's money, resource, time, and kind of buy-in from leaders. Without that, I just think everything else is going to be so complicated, and you're just going to be basically a comms team trying to push everything uphill constantly. So I think just get investment will be my thing, and that unlocks everything else.
Right.
It's a bit of a cheat, I think, but basically you just need time and money and buy-in.
For everything. But okay, thank you so much, Nikki, Debo, and Caitlin. That's great. Thank you for everybody for joining us. There's 2 more IC Index webinars. We're talking about clarity of AI next month on the 19th of November, and we're talking about change comms on the 3rd of December. So head to the IOIC website if you want to sign up to join that. This is being recorded, so it'll be on demand if you want to catch up on anything in the next couple of days. But thanks again to the panel, and hopefully see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.